Hi, I'm Dan from eFlotion Support Services, a wellness support specialist who offers mental health support work to NDIS clients here in Australia, whilst also offering EFT tapping services to people that want to engage with that all around the world. And I also speak from my own personal experiences with CPTSD or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and what I've learned from those experiences to share with people who may be going through similar experiences, and what I've learned may be of benefit to you. And what I've definitely learned is the intricate differences and also similarities between stress and trauma. So sit back, relax, grab a relaxing cup of tea as we begin our journey into describing the differences between stress and trauma. So what's the differences, but also the similarities between trauma and stress? Because one can actually affect the other, but even though we might have trauma and it might feel stressful, it's different to stress itself. When we have stress, for example, stress can be things where we have an external pressure, be it financial, be it relational dynamics, be it a difficult conversation that we've had to have, bills, everything that we need to interact with in our day-to-day life, and having that capacity where it tests our capacity to cope. But once the stress has passed, we return back to our initial capacity and our initial baseline, and we're able to move beyond what that stressor was. Whereas when we have trauma or even unresolved trauma, trauma is not what happened to you, but as a result of what happened to you. So the trauma is in the after effects, not so much the trauma of the traumatic situation that happened to you. And for many people, like with CPTSD, there are more than one traumatic event that creates a sense of unsafety within ourselves. This trauma that has happened in the past, those learning and maladaptive behaviors, and also that constant feeling of unsafe and hypervigilance, doesn't actually pass once like with the stress, once the stress has passed, because we are constantly feeling unsafe within our bodies and constantly are feeling under threat, even though what has occurred or the perpetrator might no longer be in our life. We are still scanning our environment with hypervigilance, being constantly on fight, flight, freeze mode, because we're wanting to keep ourselves safe from something that has already occurred in the past. Unresolved trauma doesn't remain in the past. It often shows up in our present life and often shows up as maladaptive behaviors. So what are maladaptive behaviors? They're often coping mechanisms to an environment that we've had to adapt our behavior to, where there may have been what we should have received as healthy attachments, but there was unhealthy attachment. So we had to adapt our behavior in order to receive some form of caregiving from our caretakers. Now, these behaviors may maladapt into where a child is almost like the therapist for the adult and taking care of their emotional needs. Perhaps the parent brought the child into the world as that source of love, but the child doesn't actually meet that needs because it's a child, and they have to actually adapt their behaviors to actually meet the unmet love and fulfillment within the parent. Or it also might show up as people-pleasing behaviors, where a person has to keep everyone pleased and make sure that the environment is safe. Otherwise, there might be harm done to the person, be it emotional or physical abuse. And it might also show up in our day-to-day life as avoidance of dealing with certain issues or dealing with certain situations or going into certain experiences because it reminds us of our past. So we maladapt our behaviors to avoid a situation that we don't want to be able to deal with. But the more that we avoid a situation, the more that it persists within our lives. So this implicit memory that's lying dormant that we're not aware of can actually shape and also trigger once we come into contact with something that reminds us of our unresolved trauma that is still alive and well, and we're having to maladapt our behaviors even in the present when the abuse that occurred in the past has already happened, but we're still living our life in reaction to that. Whereas if we have something like stress, once again, once the stress has passed, we return to our baseline, whatever that is, and our capacity to cope. But sometimes when life is running smoothly, our capacity is good. But when we encounter a trigger which triggers our unresolved trauma, then that can create stress, which then once again rubs against that raw wound that is still unprocessed and still goes beyond our conscious awareness, that can also shape who we choose to interact with and also who we choose to heal as healing practitioners. This is where implicit memories come into play. Implicit memories are those unconscious memories that we don't actually recall, similar to a memory from the past, as they happen more on the unconscious level. If you think of a person that you really enjoy their fragrance or their cologne, now think of it in more of a trauma perspective. That cologne that when you were younger may have been worn by the perpetrator that abused you. And therefore, when you smell this fragrance in the present, even though the trauma has occurred in the past, that implicit memory may trigger and create a traumatic response within your mind where you become hypervigilant towards a person that is simply wearing a cologne or a fragrance. They will trigger a response where we don't feel safe and we need to be hyper vigilant towards a perceived threat, even though the person wearing the fragrance is not actually threatening towards us. It just happened to be their choice. This can also show up in a person's tone of voice. So if a caregiver or a parent used a threatening tone of voice, and we hear similar in a partner or in a work colleague or even within a client or participant that we support, that may trigger a response where we feel that we need to either hide ourselves or need to escape the situation or even stand up towards it, our fight, flight, freeze response to a threat. And these implicit memories are things that happened within the past that go unnoticed and unresolved because they're on the unconscious level. Now, in my 15 years of doing support work, doing mental health support work frontline, I've of course encountered many different support workers, clinicians, allied health, where they have spoken about why they have gotten into this line of work. And I think it's important to actually understand that where there might be still unresolved trauma that might be still forming some of their decisions, be it through implicit memory or through maladaptive behaviors. A lot of the people that I've talked with have actually got into this line of work where they may have had a condition themselves, and through learning about social work or psychology or counseling or support work or some form of caring role is almost a way of dealing with their own issues. Or it may have been that they have a family member or someone that they're giving care for, and it's almost another way of understanding and being able to properly care for another person. And I want to explore this because when we look at implicit memories, things that are still shaping our life and our maladaptive behaviors may still be the coping mechanisms that have carried us into this role. I also want to acknowledge that it's a huge privilege to be able to provide support, and also that there are people out there doing good work. And this is not a knock on their performance, it's just an awareness as a self reflective thing that we are not beyond the emotions that we are also treating other people with. So, if people are getting into this line of work due to their own conditions, then there's an important difference between applying these techniques to other people and actually receiving them ourselves. I know within EFT tapping, I was taught about borrowed benefits, and borrowed benefits is if I was working one-on-one with a client, then me tapping on the points, even though I'm not dealing with my issues and I'm saying out loud what the person's issues is going to have a stress reducing benefit to me. I'm borrowing the benefits even though I'm dealing with the issues with that person. The important awareness is that I'm dealing with their issues, not my own. So even though it might touch upon some of my own issues, it's not my specific issues that I'm dealing with. Similar with the videos, the EFT tapping videos, they might touch upon some of the issues, but they're more generalistic in nature. They're not specific to your needs, and they're not adaptive to your needs as they change. They're a static video, and as much as you want to talk to the video, I can't hear you and respond back to you. Meeting our own needs through providing care to others is another way of looking at past traumatic behaviors that may still be perpetuating into our line of work, where if we were the caretakers for adults' emotional needs or our parents' emotional needs, then it's going to be a natural fit to go into a caretaking role where you're providing healthcare to other people. The thing is, it's not going to be similar to how trauma is what happened to you in the past. What shows up in your present is not going to be the same survival techniques that worked in the past, the same coping mechanisms that worked in the past. So where a person might start to challenge or start to have challenging behaviors might start to trigger past experiences that we've had, that if we haven't resolved that, it may show up in having less tolerance towards other people, wanting to control how they interact with us, what their voice has to say, and whether they actually should have a voice. Which, if you go from the client's perspective, is they might be coming from a background where that may have been why they're there to actually get the healing from the practitioner. So that unresolved trauma that's within us may still get stressed and overwhelmed, which then triggers that trauma overwhelm of how we're actually interacting with this person. So sometimes recognizing our own behaviors and healing ourselves first before we start to heal others is a huge benefit, not only to ourselves, but to the others, where we're not borrowing the benefit, we've been of a benefit to ourselves, and now we can be present and centered and grounded to the needs of others. You have to think of it in the social work contents of meeting the client where they are rather than meeting where I need them to be, needing to control how they should be interacting with me rather than meeting them where they are and being holding a space for that, which in trauma recovery is a huge thing, because people with maladaptive behaviors may have come from backgrounds where to express themselves may have been hugely criticized, so they've learned not to express themselves. But anything that is not expressed starts to become repressed and can actually have health conditions, where it's autoimmune conditions or lack of sleep or digestive issues or headaches or anything, chronic tension within the body, where they've tried to express themselves but it just feels contained within their body. So being present for our own needs means it's being present for the other people's needs. So where unresolved trauma shows up is knowing that some implicit memories, some past biases that we might hold towards people might still be needing to be addressed. So addressing these means that we start to break the cycle, and anything that we start to resolve no longer persists. So it's found its resolution and is no longer persisting. We also have to look at, are we going into healing other people to fulfill that need? Is caring for others a way of receiving that love and acceptance and the attention of doing a good job? Because we were only seen as doing good when we were in service of others. When we received the praise, we felt good within ourselves, rather than doing it from a place of genuinely wanting to help and create change within people's lives. Sometimes we have to fulfill our own needs where we're not seeking that through someone else, because someone else is always bound to let us down, which may create less tolerable behaviors towards that person. But if it's in the healing context, or if it's within a relational dynamic, the more that we're trying to control others might show that we've started to lose control within our own internal environment and started to enforce that in a maladaptive way, because that stress has created a burnout effect. If you think of it in an electrical term, if we have our capacitor and we overload it with too much charge, we're going to be burnt out. So we want to be able to recognize where we might be going above and beyond our own means to be able to meet the needs of others, rather than being able to step back and meet our own needs, which may bring up feelings of guilt, shame, and blame because we may feel or have been made to feel that it's selfish to take care of our own needs, or that we're going to be seen as a failure if we take a step back and actually care for ourselves. Once we start to bring awareness that it's okay to feel the vulnerability, it's also stepping into maturity of going, I need to step back in order to be present for myself so I can then care for others. It's putting the oxygen mask on yourself first before putting it on others. But we can lose sight of that because stress and trauma can overwhelm our ability to cognitively think, because we're going into old survival patterns of I just need to grin and bear it, I need to push through, I need to push down, and my emotions don't matter. But definitely in a healing context, if we're dealing with people's emotions and displaying empathy towards others, then we don't want to be showing that our emotions don't matter and only their emotions matter, because that once again gets into people pleasing. So these things do perpetuate beyond just a nervous system dysregulation, that EFT tapping is good tool to actually down-regulate our nervous system, but it's a tool is only good as the craftsman wielding it. And if the craftsman is not actually at their full capacity to cope because they're overwhelmed, then they're not going to be really at their full capacity to wield the emotional tools. So what's our takeaway from all this? Well, it's understanding that stress and trauma will affect all of us, no matter what your title is and who you are as a person. Stress can trigger the trauma, which can create a traumatic overwhelm, which affects our ability to function, our capacity to cope, and also our cognitive functioning, which might put us into old maladaptive behaviors and also limit our capacity to thrive within life and take on new possibilities and new understandings, not only of different people, but also of ourselves. It's also looking at where we might have stressors in our life and being able to say that, is this past experiences that are keeping me from taking a break from this and actually managing this so I can be better in the long term? Or do I need to put this on the back burner and to the point where it does start to overwhelm my capacity to cope, which might start to create traumatic symptoms within myself, be it from autoimmune to physical conditions to behavioral conditions. EFT tapping is a great technique to down-regulate our stress, but does down-regulating our stress also change our behavior or just make us less reactive to questions that might start to question our behavior in an effort to start to change what is maladaptive into a more adaptive response to life, rather than trying to avoid situations or avoid responsibility that might actually be the thing that grows maturity and the capacity and the resilience to meet stresses long term. So the differences between stress and trauma, once again, stress is something that happens to us from time to time, but once it passes, we can return to our life and it doesn't affect us long term. Whereas trauma is something that happened to us, and as a result of that, we have formed a sense of unsafety within ourselves, a dysregulated nervous system. It may have caused perceived brain damage or parts of our brain that weren't fully developed due to not receiving the care and attention that we deserved. And it might also carry implicit memories that still keep us on guard in an effort to keep ourselves safe from not being hurt from past experiences that have happened to us, but we're still on guard in the present. And those implicit memories can shape our view of our life, where it might actually be limiting our life, where all people might not be the abuser, but we're viewing it through that lens in order to keep ourselves safe. So I'm Dion from Eflotion Support Services. I hope this has been of benefit to you. I do offer EFT tapping sessions one-on-one online, so you can help to down-regulate your nervous system and help down-regulate the stress, and also create a safer environment within your own mind and body. So until next time, I'm Dion from Eflotion Support Services. and bye for now.